So we've had an interesting turn of events as of November 13th, 2025. It seems that CSIS director Danrogers, who I've spoken of in numerous videos, as being involved in orchestrating many of these criminal harassment campaigns against law-abiding Canadian citizens for Orwellian thought crimes, or for the horrendous crime of speaking out against police corruption or police and RCMP involvement in drug trafficking. That individual has all of a sudden be involved in a whole bunch of press conferences, and it seems that he was sent out to do some sort of a public image campaign. And the timing couldn't be more interesting, could it? Because this occurs just no more than 6 days after I mentioned in a recent video the things that this individual has been involved in, spoke about that, and spoke about how he more or less hides in the shadows and keeps himself completely free of any accountability for his actions. So in order to do some damage control on that and to attempt to deceive the public into thinking that this criminal is somehow doing things in the best interest of Canadians, they've trotted him out onto the world stage for a bunch of press conferences, and he gets asked a bunch of questions which he was obviously told about in advance so that he would know how to answer them. A bunch of softball questions from the controlled propaganda networks such as the CBC, CTV News, who routinely lie to you about literally everything. So they've trotted Danrogers out there, and if you think it's a coincidence that they're just trotting him out there after I spoke about what he's been involved in that recent video, you're a bit naive. Just looking at the fact that my videos receive low view counts, don't be fooled by that. YouTube lies about the view counts all the time, and they suppress anyone real who exposes corruption while promoting actors such as those Freemason auditors who they promote all the time, staging fake interactions with the police and intentionally acting in crazy and unbalanced manners so as to discredit people who really expose police corruption. Again, I have a strong suspicion that CSIS and Danrogers also play a close role in that deception as well, with planning a lot of these staged videos where people are sent out, many of them drug addicts, to pretend to expose police corruption while acting like total fools and while going out to provoke altercations, just so they seem like total idiots, to discredit anyone who speaks the truth about the realities regarding police corruption in Canada. So the timing couldn't be more perfect, could it, for Danrogers? I guess it's just a coincidence that they set up all these press conferences to try and do some damage control for his public image. Also because of the fact that I spoke the truth in saying that he does completely hide in the shadows, and he is completely insulated from any accountability for his actions, while his organization routinely breaks Canadian laws and criminally harasses law-abiding citizens whom he has wrongly, falsely declared domestic terrorists simply for the crimes of speaking the truth or having opinions which differ slightly from the controlled media narratives that you must accept if you are part of the Canadian communitarian system. So we'll go through a little bit of the footage here, and again, we have to start this off by saying what we say whenever one of these Freemason psychopaths is trotted out onto the world stage to recite a script that they've memorized. What we have to understand is these people speak through lies and inversion. So they will invert the truth and basically speak in reverse in terms of everything is an inversion and a lie and deceit, exaggeration. They may mix in a few fragments of truth only for the purposes of emotional exploitation. So the plan that they've used here with this is to use the usual emotional exploitation to try and deceive people into thinking that they're doing a good thing. And of course, to do that, they talk about children in the video, because immediately if you talk about things like, as what Danrogers is going to talk about here, claiming that children are somehow being radicalized online, so he claims, instantaneously they're going to use that as emotional deceit, emotional exploitation to try to get you on their side, simply because they're talking about children, and trying to portray it as if they themselves are looking out for children, when in reality what they're doing now, as per these things they're putting out, is it seems that they are actually monitoring children as well, and what they're looking at online, to make sure that they stay focused on state-funded material, and anyone who starts to look into the truth and deviate from the state-funded lies of the CBC and CFTO News and these other state-controlled propaganda networks, well, Danrogers has to then assume that they are being radicalized simply for being able to think. And of course, he'll make up a bunch of lies, and his organization will stage a bunch of fake skits using the fake witnesses and actors who they use also to go around slandering people and lying about good, honest people who report police corruption and police involvement in drug trafficking. He'll use those same people to set up a bunch of skits, which will be also coordinated with the media, where they'll say there's a whole bunch of radicalization going on, and we have to do this to protect you from this quote-unquote radicalization. And they will make all of that up, stage these skits, and then say, well, we're justified in doing what we're doing because of this. We're justified in monitoring people inside their own homes, completely removing all of their privacy, just due to some arbitrary things that we make up about them to justify that. So we'll go on here and listen to some of what Mr. Rogers has to say here. And again, I'd like to reiterate, it's important to note that this man has not made any major public appearances prior to this. And his first major public appearances and these press conferences come less than a week after I spoke about the things that he was involved in that video. So if you think it's coincidental, you should also look at the fact that many of these same Canadian propaganda networks, after my discussing in my videos the clear and obvious involvement of the police, CSIS, and the RCMP in facilitating the distribution of hard drugs throughout Canada, immediately a bunch of fake stories come out claiming that police have busted all these drug dealers. It's all just damage control. And this is also damage control, trotting this Freemason psychopath out to recite this script of lies which he's memorized, and to go through these generic talking points to try and deceive people into thinking that his organization, which works to criminally harass law-abiding citizens throughout his country, who have done nothing more than spoke the truth or expose corruption, is somehow doing a good thing. He has to deceive you into doing this. And so they will use the usual emotional manipulation where they bring children into it. They have to exploit children and bring them into it and lie to you about that, to try to get you on his side and to support the crimes that he's committing, and covering up behind this veil of false security for the country.
Distinguished guests, members of the press, and fellow Canadians, thank you for joining me today and allowing me to provide you with an update on the security challenges facing Canada. Invité d'honneur, membres de la presse, concitoyennes et concitoyens canadiens, merci d'être ici aujourd'hui et de me donner l'occasion de parler des défis auxquels fait face le Canada en matière de sécurité. It's my first time addressing Canadians as the director of CSIS, and I do so at a time when Canada's national security environment is more complex and dynamic than at any point in recent memory. Polarization and radicalization are on the rise, and social cohesion is eroding.
And what would be the cause of that? Now let's just take a look at what really is causing that. Could it be the propaganda that's continually put out, fragmenting people into the two sides of the left and right, which is continually pushed by the intelligence agency controlled media? I mean, I would think that would be part of that, and you're claiming that you want to stop those types of things, yet you yourself and your organization are the ones fully condoning those things, because it's well known that the intelligence agencies have a tremendous amount of influence over the propaganda that is put out by our controlled media organizations. So again, more hypocrisy here. He's talking about a problem that he and his organization are in fact involved in, and telling you that he's trying to solve the problems that they themselves are creating. Hegelian dialectic 101. So it's interesting to note that Daniel Rogers talks specifically about people trying to cause division and to, as he puts it, as he hints at, interfere with the democratic process in Canada. So just to illustrate a point here, I just want to talk about this picture here briefly. This picture is from one of the recent staged state-sanctioned protests. I believe it was from the anti-immigration protest that they put on, a theatrical performance, more than a protest, but that they put on in Toronto a few weeks back, or maybe a month ago. And I just want to draw your attention to this individual here who's standing there with his arms splayed out that way, in that almost mocking crucifixion pose, which is, again, because these people, in reality, they hate Christianity, but they just assume these fake roles with these Freemasons, playing these controlled opposition roles, and then they present them in all the fake alternative media, and also in the mainstream controlled Canadian media, present them as these mouthpieces for each side. So this guy obviously is more for the right side, and then they have their equally controlled Freemason people who they use on the right to set up these fabricated, contrived altercations, which they then use as an excuse to bring in the police and shut down the protest and say, okay, we can't have this anymore because there are all of these violent clashes and these extremists clashing and all this nonsense. But something more here. I want you to look at that individual's right arm. And if you look closely at his right arm, you will see a symbol tattooed on his right arm. And that symbol is that hand, sort of a hand symbol with a large eye in the middle of it. And that symbol is directly associated with the Kabbalah, which is the Jewish Kabbalah and mysticism, which is heavily promoted within Masonic lodges. Okay, so let me just show you a few pictures of that, just to show you that it corresponds with what he has tattooed on his arm there. And let's also note that this is one of the people who is, I guess you would say, on the quote-unquote right-wing side of these staged manufactured protests. So we can see clear connections to Freemasonry and to the Kabbalistic belief system here, which they heavily promulgate within Masonic lodges. Let's take a look at a few images of that symbol as well, just to confirm. And these are just a few images I found doing a brief Google search for the Kabbalistic symbol of the hand and eye, and you can see here the sort of rainbow color around it. Same symbol as the tattoo as he has, and that tree in the middle is the Kabbalistic tree of life, or I believe, is it referred to as the Sephiroth tree? I believe it's might be called that, something along those lines, but it's the tree of life in the middle anyway, as they refer to it there. And then the Kabbalistic symbolism, very much like the tattoo that individual has on his arm. And then a second picture here, you can see the same symbol there with the symbol of the all-seeing eye in the middle, and then of course the pyramid symbol in the middle as well. So of course these symbols, if you understand, many of the most important writers within Freemasonic circles, such as Manly P. Hall, speak about the importance of signs and symbols to Masons, and how there is a veneration for these things, and how they speak through signs and symbols many times, a lot of times, instead of words. They can communicate through signs and symbols instead of words. So you see the symbol that individual at the protest is clearly showing there on his arm. The Kabbalistic symbol of the hand with the all-seeing eye, also known as the Eye of Horus, in the middle of it. And then I just want to show you Exhibit B. And this is another photo from the same protest. And here you will see a picture of one of the leftist protesters. Could be one of those people with that state-funded organization which they refer to as Antifa. I'm not sure if this guy's a part of that, but he's from more of the leftist side in these theatrical staged protests. And you can see the banner that he's carrying there has kind of a skull and bone symbol, almost like that pirate symbol, that symbol that you'd see associated with pirate ships. And of course that symbolism is also closely associated with the military, and of course you can see the symbol of the Order of Skull and Bones, which of course is directly connected to the CIA, because it is well known that many members of the Order of Skull and Bones go on to be members of the CIA. For example, Bush Jr. and Sr., both being members of Skull and Bones, and of course Bush Sr. going on to be head of the CIA as well. So connections to the intelligence services. And again, we've also spoke about how Freemasons and those within these occult organizations which have direct ties to our intelligence services speak through signs and symbols. So again, he's just carrying this to let people know, right, that there's associations with this protest and the intelligence agencies. And again, that symbol, of course, closely associated also with the military, where they have that Punisher symbol with the skull. You see a lot of people online, interestingly enough, in the comment sections, also showing either the skull and bone symbol or that Punisher skull symbol. And that's also, it's just utilized, sorry about that, it's just utilized to let people who are in the know understand what this really is, understand that they're controlling it and that it's just a staged state-run protest. And of course, what we're seeing at these protests as well is connections with the state-funded media and with the fake alternative media like Rebel News, where they will have all these people there who are sent to orchestrate these staged theatrical altercations, right? They'll stage all these fake fights and things like this, and then they'll put it out there, and of course they've conditioned people to want to see nothing but fights and conflict and mindless nonsense like this online. So they'll put it all out there and it'll get a lot of views, and then they'll also use these staged altercations at these fake protests where the intelligence services control both sides of the protests while pretending to give people the illusion of democracy. And then they'll use it as justification because of all these staged fights and fake altercations that they've set up between their state-funded actors to justify bringing in the police and shutting down the protests and saying, well, look what happens. Every time we give you people the right to go out and protest, there's all of this violence and chaos. So we have to shut down your right to protest. So it all falls in perfectly with the plan orchestrated by our intelligence services throughout the Fiveyes countries. And interestingly enough, you can see almost these identical methods being used in all of the Fiveyes countries with these staged theatrical productions in which Freemasonry and our intelligence services are associated with controlling both sides and having these people manufacture this fake orchestrated conflict so as to justify bringing in more and more police, and then having the media organizations say, well, look at what these protesters are doing, violent clashes all the time. Look at what happens when we allow them the right to have free speech and freedom of expression. We have to shut this down. What they're not telling you is the vast majority of the people out there are just people who they send in to orchestrate these manufactured clashes. So the reason I'm showing these pictures is to illustrate my point of how deceitful and dishonest Daniel Rogers is when he talks about people trying to divide and cause conflict and affect the democratic process within the country. Who's really doing that, Daniel? Who's really directly connected to doing that? Yes, I think we know who it is.
Events are unpredictable and competition between states is intensifying. Our global environment emboldens competitors, attempts to interfere and spy, and advancements in technology enable our adversaries while challenging us to adapt. All aspects of national security have risen in urgency and in priority, and the demands on our service are unrelenting, and there is no clear path to it.
And yet you're spending your time terrorizing and criminally harassing me as I attempt to go to my job, sending criminal biker gangs to stalk and harass law-abiding citizens, sending police to follow and stalk people continually everywhere they go, even though they're law-abiding citizens who have done nothing more than speak the truth, which deviates from your criminal compulsive lying narrative of your controlled state-funded propaganda networks. That's what your organization is spending its time doing, despite your lies here.
A simpler future. But while challenged, CSIS has remained strong and able. We have trusted partners in Canada and abroad, and together with them, we've acted decisively to keep Canadians safe. Our intelligence professionals devote themselves to protecting the rights, freedoms, and safety of all in Canada.
And this is all nothing but complete and utter nonsense and lies. They don't keep people safe at all. They terrorize and criminally harass law-abiding Canadians simply for the crimes of being able to think outside the box. People who may question some of the totalitarian things that are being pushed, people who questioned things during the COVID situation. It is well known that many of the people who weren't actually controlled, and part of that entire psychological operation of the trucker convoy, which they set up as a honey trap operation so that they could try and draw out some of the real people who opposed these tyrannical measures. The real people who weren't those state-funded actors who they sent out to flood the streets were put on watch lists to be harassed, criminally stalked, and terrorized. And we'll talk about the reasons why he won't disclose the actual methods that his organization uses shortly. I think it's pretty obvious why he won't openly disclose that, considering what his methods, the methods they utilize, actually are.
Even when they aren't aware of it, Canadians benefit greatly from their work.
Now he has to go on to their usual tactic of using staged fake terror events to justify the removal of basic rights and freedoms and creating a surveillance state. He has to do that. They have to always use emotional exploitation and deceit to push through these totalitarian agendas. And that's what it ends up in. That's what the end result is. It's to justify more and more surveillance, to justify having police everywhere, even though they're completely not needed, based upon fabricated events that these criminals have created over the years. And that's been going on for quite some time now. And the lies remain the same, and they stick to the same deceitful playbook every time they trot these actors out here to spew these lies. I'm going to go through.
And a 15-year-old Edmonton area minor was arrested for terrorism-related offense as RCMP investigators feared they would commit serious violence related to Com764, a transnational violent online network that manipulates children and youth.
Okay, now it must be pointed out that most of these online networks are set up by these people, the intelligence agencies, and this is more than likely fabricated, what he's referring to there. I don't know the specifics of that event in great detail, but I do know that they set up many of these online groups just for the purpose of fabricating these fake events, which they can then use to attempt to justify more of a police state, bringing in more of a police state and bringing in more surveillance everywhere. They have to fabricate these events because the things that they're bringing forth just aren't happening. So they use the Hegelian dialectic. They create the problems themselves. They try to push for a reaction from the people who they've deceived. And then when there is a bit of a reaction, they then come in and offer you the predetermined solution, which is always more surveillance, more police everywhere, until it comes to the point where they're having armed military personnel everywhere walking down your streets, due to nothing more than mostly fabricated events that they've used to justify this.
Across widely accessible online platforms. And only a few kilometers from
so what he says in this regard is to be taken with a grain of salt, based on the irrefutable proof that they have continually, time after time, staged these events to justify bringing in more and more unnecessary security and to create a police state and to create a surveillance state. When you've lied over and over and over again about these things, everything you say has to fall under scrutiny.
Late 2023 and early 2024, two 15-year-olds were arrested in Ottawa for allegedly conspiring to conduct a mass casualty attack targeting the Jewish community in Canada's capital.
Did that happen, or was that just fabricated? Again, we have extensive evidence that over and over again, your organization and other intelligence services fabricate these events simply to justify asking for more money to bring in more and more police and to create a military police state and basically to create a surveillance state, and also just to justify what you're doing, which is really in reality, for the most part, just terrorizing your own citizens, terrorizing people on behalf of private interests, for personal reasons, on behalf of the state, and not actually doing anything that you say you do. So naturally, anything that you bring up in this regard has to fall under the utmost scrutiny, since your organization has been known to lie over and over and over again with regards to staging these contrived events in order to justify more and more totalitarianism.
Clearly, radicalized youth can cause the same harms as radicalized adults. But the societal supports for youth may help us catch radicalization early and prevent it.
So he has to what he's getting at here is he has to monitor your children in your own home. They have to have surveillance to monitor your own children in your own home, because you can't just have the parents do that. You can't just have the parents be responsible for what their children are looking at online. No, they have to have people monitoring you and your children in your own home due to fabricated events that they've made up to justify this absurd tyranny.
Why CSIS joined the RCMP and our intelligence partners from the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand in release.
Okay, so you hear that again, and he's referring to the Fiveyes intelligence services, all of whom are interconnected. So if CSIS has you on a watch list for probably doing something good, like speaking the truth or speaking out against corruption, which is the main reason why they target people in those areas in Canada and all those other countries. If you move to one of those other countries in the Five Eyes intelligence community, such as New Zealand, the UK, United States, Australia, you will be targeted in exactly the same way, because all of these intelligence services are interconnected. And so that is the Five Eyes intelligence service that Rogers is referring to here.
A joint public report in December 2024 highlighting the evolving issue of young people and violent extremism. It provides advice to parents,
most of which is fabricated, I might add,
guardians, and others with information to help them identify early concerns and address youth radicalization before it's too late. Fortunately, only a small number of youth or adults with extreme views resort to violence. But when they do, the consequences are devastating.
But you would have us believe there's a lot more, since so many of these events that are talked about in your controlled propaganda networks, such as the CBC and CTV News, are staged. They are staged and they're absolutely fabricated, and you use actors, you use people who are community-based agents who train their children, very sick people who train their children to deceive, lie, spy on their neighbors. You use them to partake in these activities, and you stage fake events with them in coordination with the media. And you put these events out there and try to use these events as justification for your services to enact more tyranny against its own citizens, simply for speaking the truth and being honest and upstanding. Meanwhile, you facilitate and enable criminals to operate freely. You facilitate the drug trade. There's no question about that. We can say for certain that our intelligence services, the RCMP, and local police in Canada are fully involved in that. And I'll tell you exactly why shortly. Anything he says regarding these quote-unquote so-called attacks has to fall under the utmost scrutiny, since his organization, in coordination with the controlled propaganda media news networks in Canada, have been proven over and over and over again to be liars who have fabricated these events in order to justify tyrannical agendas to be pushed to suppress the freedoms, the basic rights and freedoms of Canadian citizens who aren't already a part of their communitarian system. And that is a large number of people who they control, and that is why they are so that is why they can so easily push through these deceitful agendas, because they have all these people who are willing to lie and deceive, endless amounts of people who they can use as false witnesses, people who will deceive, people who will partake in these false flags and lie about literally everything, including the exploitation of children, including even going so far as to fake the deaths of children. And of course, these people who they use are well paid for their efforts. So anything he says regarding this has to fall under the category of potential emotional exploitation, which is what these intelligence agencies do to try and deceive you into accepting new tyrannical laws. And it also has to fall under extreme scrutiny, since these media organizations are identical to the boy who cried wolf, over and over and over again, pushing fabricated events as being real, provably fabricated events as being real, such as just one example being the event at Parliament Hill, where all of these major Canadian news organizations claimed there was a terrorist attack. And during that supposed active shooter event at Parliament Hill, which all of these media organizations reported on, all of these Canadian propaganda networks all reported identical stories on, we can clearly see in CNN's footage of that event an Ottawa police officer carrying an automatic rifle, looking directly at the media cameras and bursting out laughing, along with another officer who was doing it next to him as well. Is that something that you would be doing if you were actually dealing with an active shooter event? Obviously not. Not only is there deceit involved, there is mocking deception involved, and they're literally mocking the people who they are attempting to deceive with these things. So these are the things that come into play every time this man talks about these quote-unquote events, which he and his organization have been known to use over and over and over again, as have the other intelligence services in the Fiveyes countries, to justify invoking new tyrannical measures to restrict freedoms.
60 victims injured. Ces résultats tragiques auraient été plus élevés si le SCRS et nos partenaires chargés de l'application publique sur l'ingérence étrangère et le travail de la défense. Also, alongside Public Safety Canada's Counter Foreign Interference Coordinator, we partner with ethnic, religious, and cultural communities. Dialogue with them serves equally to share our information about transnational repression and to help us better understand their experiences.
So they're also heavily pushing the blame China narrative, which is a common recurring theme throughout all of these Five Eyes intelligence areas, where they have these people come out and lie and, in coordination with the controlled media, blame everything on China. Blame everything on supposed Chinese interference. Yet again, I come back to a point that I've made over and over again. We have some of the most sophisticated technology available anywhere. And this also ties in with drug trafficking and how all of these narcotics are somehow getting into the country despite the resources available to people like this man and the other organizations who his organization are closely intertwined with. They have all of this technology, yet somehow that's just being able to occur. I mean, how is that possible? How is it possible that you have technology that allows you to spy on law-abiding citizens in their homes so that you can criminally harass them, but somehow you can't use that same technology to locate people who are dealing drugs, to locate these crime syndicates that are used to run drugs throughout the country? I mean, it's pretty obvious that technology is not being used for what you say it's being used for, but for other more nefarious reasons. Because if you were really using that technology that you have to its full potential, you'd be able to stop all drugs from coming into the country almost effortlessly. Yet over and over we hear these fabricated stories about how somehow all of these drugs are getting in, and now if these drugs are getting in with that technology available to you to spy on literally anyone, that could only be happening with complicity of our intelligence services and our law enforcement. There's no other conclusion that can be drawn, despite the endless lies that these controlled propaganda news networks, which I might add, people like this man here literally tell these news networks what to say. Let's not make any mistakes here. They're bringing him out and making it seem like this is something where he's appealing to them. In reality, he's above them. He's a representative of the Crown, and the Crown will dictate exactly what happens and what is put out on these media organizations. So it is complete and utter nonsense to have these stories put out about all this crime that's going on and all of the drugs that are in the country, and to claim that these people somehow aren't able to stop it. How utterly incompetent would they, CSIS, the RCMP, and law enforcement be, with the type of sophisticated technology they have to spy on law-abiding citizens in their home, to not be able to use that technology to deter drugs from being distributed throughout the country and to bust all the drug dealers and get all of the hard drugs out of the country? They could do that in a heartbeat. So we can tell, obviously, the only clear and obvious conclusion is that these people are fully involved in it. they are facilitating it. They are involved in it, and they're involved in the facilitation of these activities. And we can see for sure that they use these controlled propaganda news networks to cover for their crimes and to create fake boogeymen, making up ridiculous lies like saying there's Mexican drug cartels operating in Canada. So if that's the case, it comes back to the more obvious question: how incompetent are the RCMP to have not shut that down with the type of technology to spy on all of their citizens that the RCMP and CSIS have? It would not be possible. If they were actually doing their jobs, that would all be shut down, and we wouldn't have hard drugs in the country, and we wouldn't have these criminal organizations who are seemingly allowed to freely operate due to police corruption, Freemason police corruption in this country. It would not be happening. So we can tell that these are absolute bold-faced lies that this man, his organization, and his controlled propaganda networks routinely disseminate to deceive people.
And defend Canada's interests whenever it becomes necessary. For example, we've provided Inuit and territorial governments with information that empowers them to take into account national security interests as they make decisions about economic and research opportunities with foreign companies and investors.
Yeah, and you've probably given them information to deceive them into stalking their own people as well. I'm sure that's happened as well, because I'm sure there are people within those communities who are awake to your corruption and the crimes that you and the police are involved in committing, and who are awake to the drug trafficking situation. So, of course, you would go to people within their communities and attempt to turn those people against them, which is what you do. You turn people against each other, manipulate people to harass and terrorize otherwise good, fine, and upstanding, honest people. And to do this, you often use criminals and the dregs of society to assist you in these measures, who you allow to freely operate.
If he was actually interested in exposing the people who are involved in causing division and disrupting the democratic process in Canada as he claims, then Danrogers would have CSIS investigating many of the Canadian Masonic lodges who are used to insulate these criminal activities, which are clearly in operation to fragment and destabilize so many of the foundations within the country, including the right to free speech, the right to protest. If people can't go down to a protest and voice their views in a democratic manner, if instead huge amounts of state-funded actors are being sent to control both sides of the protest, which with people who have already purposefully been fragmented into two sides to destabilize and turn the population against each other, and if we can see clear and direct connections to these operations being drawn between Masonic lodges and the corrupt criminal police who also take part in staging these protests and the fake altercations at these protests. If clear connections can be made, and yet CSIS completely ignores this and won't have any part of even acknowledging, or let alone acknowledging or investigating any of these things which can be provably drawn, the connections can be provably drawn to Masonic lodges, what does that say about their legitimacy and credibility as an organization that is really legitimately trying to protect people? I think we can draw the clear conclusion that this is all nothing more than fabrication on his part, and clearly he knows that these things have direct connections to Freemasonry, but being a Mason himself, he won't break his oath of silence, and he won't speak to expose any of these things, and we know exactly why that is. Rogers pontificates self-righteously about the supposed challenges facing his organization, while being deceptively evasive about the clear and obvious facts concerning the origins of these manufactured problems, which our own intelligence services and the criminal factions that operate above the law within Canadian police departments and Masonic lodges helped to create. The relentless barrage of lies that this psychopath uses to attempt to conceal the truth, and his willingness to exploit and manipulate any members of the public, young or old, seem to know no boundaries. For obvious reasons, during this recent array of staged news conferences, Daniel Rogers, the director of CSIS, declines to disclose any information relating to methods that his organization uses against people who they have declared potential domestic terror threats. Here, I will discuss some of the methods that his organization uses based on my own personal experiences as a subject of over 4 years of their criminal harassment, despite being a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record. And for obvious reasons, Daniel Rogers declines to disclose any of the methods that his organization uses when they are dealing with quote-unquote potential domestic terrorists. And the reason for that is because these methods are extreme and are cruel and unusual punishment and would not be accepted by most of the public if they knew that they were utilizing these methods, particularly against people who have committed no crime and who they are just slandering and targeting and creating fabricated justifications for doing these things to. So since he won't disclose that, I can disclose some of these methods since I know what they are, having been subjected to these attacks by CSIS and the RCMP and police in Toronto, Gatineau, and Ottawa, starting back in, first awakening to it in the summer of 2021. So it's been going on now for 4.5 years. And having moved to a different area and into a different province, these same methods still are being utilized and these same things are being done. So some of the methods that they use are subjecting the target to extreme noise harassment all the time. They have people who are given specific state-funded vehicles on loan, and they use these vehicles. They're tampered with, the engines are tampered with so that they make extreme and excessive noise. They will send these cars to follow subjects of their harassment campaigns around everywhere they go. For me, they send them to drive back and forth continually out in front of my workplace all throughout the night, since I work the night shifts and I work alone. Knowing that I'll hear this, they send them to do that all throughout the night. They also work with criminal motorcycle gangs who swarm around, harass, stalk, and attempt to intimidate the law-abiding citizens who CSIS has slandered and put on these watch lists. So there's a clear connection to, literally a clear connection to criminal gangs who they use. As well, some of these motorcycle gangs have connections to the police and the military as well. And you can also find clear connections to drug trafficking with these motorcycle gangs, which CSIS uses at their disposal to criminally harass law-abiding citizens. So that is part of the noise harassment campaign that they also subject you to. And for an extended period of time, they have been having these motorcycle gangs continually follow me around to harass me, to threaten and attempt to intimidate me as I simply try to go to and from my job. And then when I'm at work, they have them drive back and forth in front of my workplace all throughout the nights. Although they've cut back on that a little bit recently, since I've shown how much of it they've done in my videos. They've recently cut back on that. But that part of that could be attributable to the colder weather. So other methods that they use are as follows. First of all, they will have people in law enforcement, the police, the RCMP, compile extensive dossiers of lies, fabrications, slander, which are used to enlist people all around the subject of the harassment, neighbors, acquaintances, co-workers, sometimes even friends and family members, to take part in doing this 24/7 surveillance on the subject of the harassment. And of course, to do this, they have to utilize all lies to justify trying to get these people on board to do this. So extensive slander campaigns are utilized, and it doesn't matter if the subject of the harassment moves to a new neighborhood or even a new province or even a new country. The same slander campaigns will be run there where the corrupt Freemasons in local law enforcement, as well as Freemasons within these communities, will be used to go and spread extensive lies about these people so that they can enlist people to do what is essentially criminal harassment and stalking and do illegitimate, illegal surveillance against these people who they're harassing. So that's another method there that they utilize. And for obvious reasons, Daniel Rogers won't talk about that in front of the media. Another method that they use is having these same people who they've enlisted follow the subjects of their harassment around. They will have people follow you even into retail establishments and in grocery stores. They will have specific CSIS people or people who they've enlisted to enter the store when you enter, to follow you around, often to attempt to provoke
altercations to try and get the subject of the harassment to respond in some way which can be used for further slander. So they will have agent provocateurs wherever the person goes. And in many cases, they will attempt to provoke. For example, I have footage of one of these individuals who'd shown up at multiple different locations where I was. I believe he was sent by CSIS, following me around a grocery store, entering when I entered, attempting to slam his cart directly into mine. And after I narrowly avoided him when he tried to slam his cart into me, he then proceeded to continue to follow me around the store and then leave at the exact time I was leaving and follow me out. And then this same individual, this bald guy wearing a blue shirt, happened to show up at a totally different location when I was down by the waterfront, and he was sent to walk directly up to me and stand right next to me. And this is all done because the subject of the harassment will know it is openly breaking Canadian laws. It is criminal stalking and harassment. And so they are trying to provoke some sort of a response from the subject where the subject gets angry and confronts the person, which can then be recorded by the countless false witnesses that CSIS employs to slander the person. It can then be recorded and then presented as fabricated evidence to attempt to push lies that the subject of the harassment is somehow mentally unstable. So these are methods that they use because everything that they use in these harassment campaigns has to be contingent upon deceit, since the people that they're harassing with these methods, for the most part, have done nothing wrong and have broken no laws. They have to fabricate these things to justify the criminal harassment, which usually stems from either the person speaking out against corruption, in some cases being a whistleblower, exposing police corruption, exposing corruption within public service sectors. And in other cases, it is literally passed on down where they target entire families. As hard as that is to believe, that has been my personal experience, where they've also targeted other members of my family. Although this system seems to have been in place in Canada for a long time, how active of a role CSIS themselves as an organization were playing back in those days, I don't know. But certainly the methods were the same, and these are the same methods that we can show correspond with methods that the East German Stasi would use against people who they consider to be dissidents, and that other communist regimes, such as those with communist despot Vladimir Lenin, would use to attack people who they felt were going against state-funded narratives and not following the directions of the state. So these same cruel and unusual punishments, which have to be used in deceitful ways, and also there are extensive methods used to try to discredit people if they try to bring forth footage to expose this online. I'll talk about that a bit in some of the future videos as well. But getting back to more some of the methods that they use, the reasons are obvious why Daniel Rogers won't disclose any of these methods, and a few more here. 24/7 surveillance, even within the home of the subject, is another method that is utilized. And this surveillance, they want you to know that you are under surveillance 24/7, even in your own home. And so they are using a lot of the advanced technology to do this. I can't claim to know exactly how that technology is used, but I can say for certain, based on my extensive documentation, that there are too many things that I've recorded that would lead me to the clear conclusion that there have been surveillance within all of the homes I've lived in for the past 4 years, and possibly even going back years before I was awake to what any of this was. So that is another thing. They will use this surveillance also to let the subject of the harassment know that they're being surveilled by having people exit at the same time they exit, having neighbors come out of the house at the same time they exit or go inside at the same time, and also by having people, if you live in one of these apartments or condos, oftentimes they will have people do things such as tapping on the floor or making some sort of noise. And that is another thing that is utilized within the homes. They will have people who, especially if you're in an apartment complex or in a townhouse, that's why they want everyone in those places where they're as close as possible to their neighbors in these smart cities, because they will have these people make excessive amounts of noise, sometimes stomping on the floors if they're above you, or banging on the walls. And then if you say anything about it, they're to say you're crazy and then call the police. So these are methods that they use. And all of these things done in a very deceitful way, and it's obvious why Daniel Rogers doesn't want to talk about these things, that they're involved in enlisting people to do these things. Because what is going on beneath the surface is there is a lot more than what you see on the outside. And so it's a very extensive program that goes on, and once you start to understand this, you also understand that there are things going on in this country where they control very large segments of the population, and they have enlisted them in general, and they get benefits and perks for doing whatever the state wants them to do. And these are the people who they will use as false witnesses to fabricate evidence against people who they're harassing, and also to participate in staged false flag events. And some of them are even willing to exploit their own children, sadly enough, just to get material benefits from the state. Another method that they use is stalking and harassment by corrupt Freemason police officers, firefighters, people in ambulances. They will use these vehicles to subject you to noise harassment with sirens wherever you go. They will have them follow the people who they're targeting in this way. They will have them work in coordination with these deceitful members of these communities who they have enlisted to lie about these people, to all gang up on the person and attempt to create fabricated instances so that police can write false reports, falsely claiming that the people who they're harassing somehow have quote-unquote mental health issues, when in fact the people who are doing these things are the ones who are very sick and who have mental health issues. But a lot of it revolves around methods that they use to completely isolate the people who they're harassing from any support services, so that they are as vulnerable as possible, and so that they can try and discredit them as much as possible as they continue these cruel and unusual harassment tactics against them.